Hello and welcome to Scale War Machines. Every now and then there's a modelling project that sticks at the back of your mind, begging you to make it, but it never gets realised. That was the case with this, our M4A1 Sherman tank. It was first knocked together from a Tamiya Sherman turret and an Italeri hull several years ago. I made this model such a long time ago that this video is positively ancient and was first released in 2012 as a premium download. Anyway, the model sat around on the workbench for ages, waiting for a rebuild. In the meantime, I used it as a testbed for paints and finishes. But now the time has come to breathe new life into our model with a rebuild, and it just so happens our kit would make a perfect base for one of the most specialised tanks of World War II, the Sherman Duplex Drive, or DD, a swimming version of the famous American tank. So I'm going to embrace the spirit of make, do and mend and show you that you don't have to spend hundreds on kits and accessories. You can just take an old model, strip it back and start again. That's what I've got in mind for this model. I'm going to convert it to a former DD, a swimming tank that had been retired from amphibious duties and used as a normal fighting vehicle on the front lines. In this case, unsurprisingly, I'm aiming for Normandy. Let's see what's in store in this film. In this series, we'll be learning all about scratchbuilding, creating surface textures and details, moulding new parts, and a bit later, sculpting, and much more. Plus we'll be painting and weathering the model as well. All this illustrated with rare archive footage and pictures sourced from around the world. Before we show you how I turned this unloved kit into this, a former duplex drive tank, we're going to learn a bit more about what we'll be building, the Sherman DD swimming tank. In 1944, the Allies knew to successfully invade occupied Europe, they needed machines designed for amphibious warfare, tanks that could storm the beaches and take the fight to the enemy. And they needed swimming tanks. Work began on Valentines using an inflatable canvas screen that surrounded the tank and helped it float. Production soon moved to the heavier Sherman tanks.
And that's the principle by which the Sherman can be made to float. A canvas screen is fitted onto it to give it the necessary buoyancy. To carry this screen and to get volume, a false prow and all-round decking are built onto the tank above the tracks. The screen frame consists of pillars inflated by an air compressor driven by the engine. These pillars are attached to the false prow and decking. Stiffening rails are in turn secured to the pillars and also struts secured to the tank hull. Canvas is fitted to this framework. While waterborne, the tank is propelled and steered by two propellers driven through the rear idlers. The screen is collapsible. It's raised by the air pillars and deflated by hydraulic means which also brake the struts.
The Sherman DD was born. The DD stood for Duplex Drive, a reference to the twin propellers that drove the tank in the water.
The Sherman tank is 34 tons. Immediately the tank is waterborne, the commander orders the driver to lower the propellers and engage third gear. In water, the Sherman can travel at 4.24 knots, and her fuel consumption is 25.26 gallons per hour. As the first three tanks touch bottom and come up to the beach, they may take up a hull-down position in the water by deflating their screens to the half drop at the rear. This prevents a following sea from swamping the engine, and the armament is now ready to engage any target. Once the tanks have beached, they take up their normal role of fighting vehicles.
You can find images of similar tanks in both British and American units. Some have been completely cut down, others still retain remnants of their DD gear. So let's get going on the build. First, I have to get our swimming Sherman shipshape, starting off with the hull. I fitted new replacement resin headlights and started to build a new machine gun port. I filled it out using sculpting putty, in this case milliput. Milliput comes in a range of colours, and once mixed it can be shaped. It dries hard as a rock, and I've made a video all about it. I'll put a link in the description. It makes the new home for a Hull machine gun salvaged from the spares box. A feature of these later Shermans was thickened armour plating in the hull and turret sides. So I showed this using plastic card pieces stuck to the hull and blended in using modelling putty. Sand it all smooth, repeat and refill as often as necessary to get a realistic effect. The final touch is to give the hull lifting hooks their distinctive shape. To do this, I built up the weld seams using another specialist sculpting putty. Duro is a two-part epoxy putty that when mixed turns green, can be shaped and sculpted easily. I use this homemade tool to make the weld seams. Finally, I use modelling putty to give the hooks their particular shape. Now the hull is ready to receive some texture. These M4A1 Sherman hulls were cast, which left a slightly rough metallic texture. The good news is this is easy to replicate with a surface primer compound. Now be warned, this stuff stinks. So use a mask, but it comes in 3 different grades, all of which can be brushed onto your models for realistic casting textures, and I've made a video all about it. I'll use it to create the effect we're looking for. Just paint it on liberally. In this case, it's going straight over the old paint finish. Work it with a used brush. Before long, you get a convincing cast metal texture. Our next move is to get the old turret in better shape. The hatch opening is way too large. To narrow it down, I used plastic card to create a new lining and reshape the opening using milliput black this time, and more modelling putty. Finally, I used the same product to create the thicker cheek armour. But to take our DD further, I'll need to make the specific changes unique to this version of the tank. What we need is more research. Films from the time show the swimming tanks covered in all sorts of fixtures and fittings. There are special side skirts, propeller mounts, as well as unique idler wheels. What would help is some real-world research, getting up close and personal with the life-size thing. I located a real former swimming tank, so I headed off to Devon on England's southwest coast to have a look at the real thing. During World War II, this wild stretch of coastline was used as a training area for D-Day. Here at Torcross is what we've come to see, a Sherman DD, rescued from the seas. On display is a large hatch M4A1 duplex drive Sherman tank. Just like the one we're making, and its past couldn't be more secret. On the morning of the 28th of April 1944, a group of E-boats attacked a training exercise codenamed Tiger. Many men and 2 landing ships were lost that day. This tank was sunk along with hundreds of tons of precious materials. It now stands as a memorial to the 638 men who lost their lives. It was rescued from the depths in 1984, and I could crawl all around the tank, take measurements, and photograph all the unique Sherman features I'll need to replicate. Armed with my research, I returned to the build. I made the suspension match my photographed tank. I removed the old bogies and used an upgrade set from AFV Club. As a way of making sure they are removable, I also glue some bolts to the units so they can be screwed on and off with ease. To make the bogies more realistic, plastic card and putty is used to detail the parts. Plus I add some rivets to the road wheels. These are injection moulded plastic bolts, a handy addition to your toolbox. By far the most complex part now is to make the new idlers at the rear of the tank. I had to build these from scratch using plastic card of various thicknesses. A circle cutter is used to mark the larger circle's shapes. A drill is then used to smooth them. A punch and die is used to make the rivets and hubs for the wheels. If you don't already own one of these really useful tools, you should. They're a great way to make rivets cheaply and easily. Just choose your thickness of plastic, add a spacer, and then choose your diameter of rivet. Use a sharp blow with a hammer to punch your rivet out. Hey presto, countless rivets. The hardest part is making the strengthening ribs, which I did with small pieces of plastic card glued and filed to shape. The idler wheels soon start to take shape. A coat of surface primer finishes them off. I ended up with a good likeness for our tank's idler wheel. As you can see, the turret has also started to show some of the features identified in the research. There's the beginnings of a commander's platform made from plastic card and brass sheet. It was here that the commander stood to steer the DD.
This tank is being handled by a fully trained crew. By watching the river banks in the background, it can be seen that the tank is tending continuously to change course. So the commander must be very quick to check these tendencies to swing and to keep the tank on its predetermined course.
My scratch building work is not yet done though. I have to build the propeller mounts that were still left in place on many Ex-DDs. To make the universal drive, I took an old GMC axle hub, which I spruced up with some plastic ribs and some rivets. The propeller mount is fashioned from 2-part quick-drying putty and plastic card details. When mounted to the rear engine plate, they'll make a good replica for the final drives that powered the swimming tank's props. A bit more detailing is added using plastic card and quick-type putty. We've built one, but we need two, so a quick and easy way to get around this is to make a mould. Silicone rubber is a great way to make it. It comes in a variety of grades. Use Lego blocks to make the mould wall and mount your pieces carefully on runners. To get a good seal, use white glue to make a nice bond around the base of the blocks and the individual pieces. Mix the silicone carefully, pour it in gently and let it dry overnight. The next day, gently remove the master pieces and you're ready to mix up some resin. Take care here, gloves and a mask are the order of the day. Mix it up precisely as instructed and pour along the runners you made in the silicone mould. You can bend the mould slightly to ensure the resin gets into all the cracks. You can poke and prod more freshly mixed resin into the cavity using a toothpick. Once dry, you can gently extract the piece, but be careful. And there we have it, some replica parts. They may need a bit of filler or repairing here and there, but it's often way quicker and easier than building a second master from scratch. The Ex-DD is starting to take shape. One of the main features still seen on the former swimming tanks were the mounting loops for the rubber canvas supports and the prominent skirting. To do this, I carefully drilled holes and using a tube of plastic threaded the hoops over them to get a straight and uniform line. Any gaps were then filled with putty. As you can see, I've also added the skirting using aluminium foil recycled from an old food container. I decided I wanted to show the skirts as being cut down, so this is the perfect material. It can also be bent to show battle damage. The DD is almost ready. I add the final surface details specific to the Ex-DDs, like the prominent weld bead on the transmission housing. And the attachment points for the canvas screen strengtheners using plastic card. For the thinner parts I used aluminium foil again and a bending tool to form the shapes. If you don't already own one, this is one accessory your toolbox cannot do without. It makes bending small photo etch or metal pieces a cinch. You can find out more about this tool in a video which I'll place in the description. As American tank crews fought on into France after D-Day, they started to come across the dense hedgerows of Normandy's bocage country. These formidable natural barriers were almost impenetrable to tanks.
Did you ever fight your way through hedgerows? They're about 6 feet wide and 5 feet high. Centuries of packing have made them hard as cement.
Then a sergeant called Cullin devised a simple way of cutting through the hedges. The Cullin hedgerow cutter, or rhino prong. It was a set of metal teeth made from old beach obstacles.
When they told General Bradley about it, he drove 60 miles to have a look and slapped top secret on it.
It was a simple but effective solution. US tankmen started to add them to their machines. There were various types. I decided to add a Type 2 device, as seen here. Some kits do come with a hedgerow cutter, but I'm going to scratch build one. To help me, the excellent French modelling magazine Steel Masters provided some plans. I cut small pieces of plastic card to size matching their drawings and started to build up the shapes. To add the rough edges and weld seams, I use thin plastic sprue, here sold in red. Our Sherman now has a magnificent new hedgerow cutter. And with a replacement set of tracks from the spares box, our DD is looking complete. That marks the end of part 1. In part 2 we'll be building some stowage and painting and weathering the model. See you then. Bye.
Subscribe for our latest videos.